Part 1, Color Value, Hills and Sky. Since we're creating a landscape, let's have our paper horizontal, left to right. Please write your name and class code at the bottom left corner of your paper. This will be the back. Now, flip your paper over to the front, and we're going to get started. The foreground is what is closest to us. Let's draw a curve from the left side of our paper to the bottom. Now we need our middle ground. Draw a curve from the right to the foreground curve and make sure to stop so it looks like they overlap. And our final line is for the background hill. Draw a curve from the left and make sure it stops at the midground curve. You now have 3 hills with a sky for the background. Next, you're going to need paint, sponge, water, and a brush. You're going to need paint in green, white, and turquoise. Let's mix up that white and turquoise. A tint is a lighter version of the main color, so when you add white, it creates a light blue. We're going to go ahead and paint everything above our background line. This is our sky. Once you've finished painting in your sky, let's rinse off our brush really well in the water and gently dry it on the sponge. Go to your paint palette and let's paint green in that first foreground hill. Fill it all in with just green. Objects in the foreground are most saturated. That means you see the color in its boldest and brightest form. That's why we're using pure green right here. Rinse off your brush again and dry it. Let's create a medium tint of green. We're going to pull some green into a new spot on our paint palette, and we're going to mix it with a little bit of white. Be careful you don't put too much white. We still need some more for our final hill in the background. Your goal is to create a medium light green, kind of like mint chocolate chip ice cream. Once you have your color mixed, we're going to paint the hill over on the right. This is our midground or middle ground hill. Our middle ground hill is also our medium light color. Objects and grass and greenery that are in the middle ground have a little less saturation than the front foreground. That's why we're using a slightly lighter green than the foreground. Once you've filled in your middle ground, rinse your brush really well and gently dry it on the sponge again. Now we're going to create our lightest tint by adding lots of white, but only a little bit of green. Be careful you don't put too much green because it's going to be really hard to make that color lighter. And you'll wind up using a lot more white paint than you're going to need to fill in that final hill in the background. Our background hill is the lightest and least saturated color. Because as the distance between you and the object, like these hills, gets bigger and the hills get farther away, the contrast also decreases. That means our ability to see different colors from farther away gets harder and objects begin to blend together. Think as if you were to look into a forest. You can see the trees right in front of you. You can see the individual yellow or red leaf that's on the ground. But if you look further into the distance, deeper into the forest, you can't really tell exactly where one leaf ends and another begins. You just kind of see a big, beautiful pattern of red, yellow, orange, and brown leaves. Part 2, Clouds, Fence, and Sheep. We're going to need water, sponge, and our paint palettes ready. You're going to need paint in brown, black, and white today. Choose 2 small brushes, one round and one flat. We're actually going to set our paintbrushes aside for the first part. Let's dip our fingers into the white paint. Let's hop our finger around and blend into the blue sky to create light, puffy, realistic looking clouds. Continue adding as many clouds as you'd like. Maybe you want just a few, maybe you want a whole bunch. It's totally up to you. After you've finished finger painting your clouds, let's grab our flat brush and dip it in the brown paint. We're going to create a fence in the foreground. Since it's closest to us, it should be the biggest fence that we're going to create today. Painting fences are easy. Just use the wide part of your flat brush and paint vertical lines with a little bit of space in between. After you've finished painting the amount of vertical lines you'd like, then paint horizontal lines to connect them together. You can have 1 line, 2, or maybe even 3 if you can fit it. After creating your foreground fence, let's move on to the middle ground fence. Again, middle ground, think medium size. So you don't want this fence too big or too small, something right in the middle. I've also turned my brush to use the thinner side of the flat part so my line isn't too thick. I'm switching over to my thinner round brush. This is going to give me really thin and small lines for my background because remember, as objects get further away, they get smaller. Put our brushes in the water and switch over to finger painting again. We're going to make a white puffy cloud that's going to be the sheep in the foreground. Remember, this sheep should be the largest sheep out of all the other sheep in your pasture. Remember to finger paint medium-sized sheep in the middle ground. Not too big, not too small, medium size. Make sure that you're making the sheep solid. It should be solid white and not blended out like we did with the clouds in the sky. Your background sheep should be the tiniest sheep on your page. You may even want to switch to your pinky finger to get really tiny puffs of white. Clouds are just sheep of the sky, and sheep are just land clouds. After you've added as many sheep as you want, making sure to have large, medium, and small, you can clean off your finger and switch to your round brush. Dip in the black and start with your sheep's head. I'm starting with a small circle on one side of my sheep. Your white paint might still be wet, That's okay. Just get some more black paint and keep painting over it until it's a color you like. I add a small dot of black to the opposite side to represent the tail, and then I make 2 to 4 lines under the sheep for the feet. So again, all I do is a small black circle, 2 little lines above the circle for the ears of the sheep, dot on the opposite side, and then a couple lines, no more than 4, under the sheep for the feet. You wouldn't really need to show details like the eyes or the snout because the eyes are usually black on these sheep and all the sheep are pretty far away, so you wouldn't really be able to see those details anyway. Just remember to get smaller and smaller as you get further and further away in your painting. You may have a lot more sheep than me. If that's the case, just make sure you add some type of black to all of your sheep. They could be laying down, so maybe you don't show the legs. They could have their back to us, so maybe you only show the tail. But just be mindful that you have a little bit of black on all of your sheep. I hope you enjoyed learning about landscapes and that you'll be able to recognize biggest and most saturated in the foreground, medium and middle colors in the middle ground, and smallest, lighter, and least saturated colors in the background. We also used our fingers to create realistic clouds in the sky and learned how to use 2 different types of paintbrushes. Thank you for joining.